I sometimes like to say that there's two modes of inquiry. The one that we're used to hearing about is self-inquiry, which is could say a transcendent movement. It's moving into the witness, into the formless, into that that's beyond the subtlest of the subtle. And so the essence of self-inquiry is giving our awareness, our consciousness, a invitation to take a backward step. So the question, who am I? What am I? What is stillness? What is God? What is the Absolute? What is presence? We can go to the mind and it can give us answers. But when we get really simple, for example, presence, which is there even when there's no thought, emotion, connection to the body, what is it? And so eventually, our inquiry, self-inquiry, takes us back, 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 back. And then we're just that. We're not looking at presence as an object anymore. It's recognized to be what we are. And then the mind can pull us back out, but we keep going back to the inquiry. And eventually, sometimes more quickly, but sometimes in a more progressive fashion, we just rest there. We abide. And so, as Ramana would say, the practice of self-inquiry is like a mixing stick of the fire. You use it until you don't need it anymore, and then you throw it into the fire. So when you're abiding, you don't need it. You only need it when you're in the mind. But even when we get to a place where we abide, we could say the curiosity doesn't end there. Some people will experience that as a sense of flatness. I'm resting as that, but is that all there is? It's kind of dead. Not enough juice. What else is there? And we could say that's the deeper movement. That's the movement of love. That's manifesting out of the void. And when I use the word love, I'm really talking about an innocent curiosity. There's a sense of I found myself as my true nature, as that void, that's space. You could say the nothing, emptiness. But then that space gets curious and says, what is the world? What is form? What is the mind? What is the ego? What is the body? Well, what is contraction? What is emotion? And so this is natural. This is, in Zen, very common teaching is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And so the realization of form is emptiness is when we wake out of the mind, the ego structure, and we find space, the formless, the nothing. And that place where nothing ever happened, the source, zero. But then the full flowering of the realization is when that emptiness sees its non-separation with form, with that exact thing which it woke out of. And that's true non-duality. And so this can happen in a more holistic, powerful way, like a big boom. And then boom, the oneness is seen very powerfully, very clearly. Or it can just be, again, like these glimpses that pierce through, and then you lose it, and then you see it, and then you lose it, and you see it. But likewise, that experience as well, we can call it that, oneness, the recognition and perception of oneness, that too can stabilize. But even in that, there still can be these little shards in our psyche, these little contractions. And so again, that movement of love coming back for itself, that curiosity of the one consciousness moving towards, moving towards, moving towards. It can be useful to just recognize that that's what it does. When the one looks out and it sees something that doesn't know that it's the one, it wants to rush towards it and give it the good news and say, you are the one too. And so this is what I like to call the other mode of inquiry, which is the moving towards. I sometimes call it the imminent inquiry as opposed to transcendent. It's moving towards. And there's a way where we can play with that, come into alignment with it, so have a sense of openness to what's arising. And the thing with awakening, the thing with presence, is that it creates a pressure in our system, in our psyche. So if there's stuff in our unconscious, awakeness is of course beautiful, it's like a light. But at the same time, it's scouring the unconscious and bringing it up into the light. And that can be painful, of course, disorientating. And we have all this stuff that we spend our entire life holding back and pushing down. Now it's coming up. And so it can be useful to have this orientation to know that that's part of the process. to welcome it. And this is really, you could say, the cutting edge, the dance. Because right on that edge is the dance that I'm talking about, is between indulging and transcending, and getting caught in both perspectives, or getting stuck in both perspectives. A lot of the non-dual teachings are pointing towards the transcendent movement. So that's the go-to modality. And it's good. It's good. But when you get to a point in your unfoldment where this movement of love, or this movement of purification, or this movement of the scouring of the unconsciousness is taking on a certain momentum. And there's an ability to abide as that transcendent at the same time. There can be a usefulness to pointing a person to let it go in, let it go into that. And of course there can be a hesitation, because we're so used to, when we go into dark contracted emotion, that we get caught in it, because there's we could say like a vortex in it, a gravitational field. But the deeper we go, and the clearer we become, and the more transparent and light we become. And what I mean by light is like a Teflon pan. These energies can't grab us as easily. We can begin to play with this edge. We can go in. When we feel like we're getting caught, then we can again just pull back. Just turn the attention back to the transcendent. Go in and pull back. Go in and pull back. And we pull back when we find that we're actually indulging. We're not just going into the emotion to allow it. We're getting into the story of it. And it's just cycling, and it's just cycling, and it's just cycling. You see this a lot in psychotherapy. You talk about your wounds, your junk. But there isn't often this invitation to pull back. So you go in, and then you just get lost in it. You loop, and you loop, and you loop, and you loop. Eventually, sometimes you break through. But in that modality, there's a deep trust, and eventually, when you work through enough, you'll be spit out, or you'll work through it. But unfortunately, people can get stuck there for a long time. But I'm talking about being with almost like the internal practice. So again, we're into the dark emotion. We're building a relationship with it. We're finding out what it is. We're hearing what its story is. We're feeling its emotions, its energies. And that's enough. Just feel. You don't need to analyze. You just need to feel. Just need to feel. And play with that edge. If you're wondering if you're indulging, then pull back. But then if you feel this force pushing you back in, let that happen too. Eventually what happens in this inquiry, when we just let it go, we don't need to help it actually. It actually goes into contraction, and then it goes in and through. And then it finds that transcendence, which it could only recognize out here, is there. It's in there. But it needs to pierce all the way through. If it doesn't go quite deep enough, that's the danger of indulging and getting caught in its gravitational field. And so a lot of teachers don't even touch the emotions and the story at all. I'm one of these people that actually is open to it. But if you notice, even though I'm open to it, I don't really allow this indulgence to happen. We bring light to it, but there's always a pointing either back out or go deeper and through. Don't stop. Go all the way through. But of course, as we were speaking yesterday, you learn this by failing. So you have to give yourself the freedom to fail, which means you're going to indulge sometimes. But eventually, if you're vigilant and you're open and you're committed, you'll see it. But the moment you see it, don't judge yourself for it. Just let it go. Because the judgment itself is part of the energy field of the indulgence. So feel open, get lost in the muck, but then find yourself again and just pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep going. Eventually you'll find your way through. And then when you find your way through, and someone asks you, how do you get through? You'll just be scratching your head because you don't even know how you got through. Because something else did it. So this is why I often say, if there's anything that you can cultivate, it's curiosity, openness, and let the rest happen on its own. Effort to keep, we could say, the mind from sidetracking the process, but always know that you're moving towards non-effort.